So we're here today to talk about coaching teams along the path to Agile Fluency. How many of you know anything about the Agile Fluency model? Few, okay. How many of you know and speak beyond your native language, one or two or three more? Okay, fair amount. When somebody asks you, what's your second language? Serbian. Okay. That's not your native? That's your second?
Well, I kind of grew up speaking English and Serbian.
Oh, wow, that's cool. Be bilingual. Really, truly bilingual. That's great. So who learned a language later? Because you're not a good... Oh, what's the third language? Russian. Okay. And Spanish. All right. Polyglot. We have a polyglot. So when somebody asks you, and all of you who raised your hand, well, so how fluent are you in Russian? What do you answer?
I know enough to make basic conversation.
Right. And do you sometimes feel like, oh, that means I'm not really as fluent as okay. So how many of you have had that experience? Oh, I should know more. Yeah, okay. So we're going to be talking about that in a minute and how that concept of fluency and speaking fluently actually relates to your Agile teams. So first thing I want to do is give an appreciation and just a shout out to Jim Shore. The Agile Fluency model is something that he and I have developed together. We've written about it together. We talk about it separately and together. And the really cool part is all the really nifty animation you will see in these slides, he did. He gets all the credit for that. So if you like animation, he gets all the credit. If you don't like animation, Jim. So how we got started with this thinking about Agile Fluency, it actually started in, I'm really fortunate in that Jim and I only live like less than a mile from each other. So we get to hang out quite a bit. And we both are involved in our local Agile user group. And, so we would spend a fair amount of our time sort of sitting around bemoaning the state of Agile, right? Anybody here ever spent any of that? Oh, Agile is just not going where it's supposed to. Yeah, okay. And we said, we would love to be able to contribute to the practice of people doing Agile well, right? Getting what they need from it. But how do you do that, right? And so we'd have these conversations about how to do that. And along the line, a number of things sort of goaded us along to think about this. And one of them was Brian Merrick. And he's, a delightful guy. On a regular basis, about every 4 or 5 years, declares Agile dead, and does something, because it's not hitting his standard, right? He holds a high standard for Agile, and what's going on that he's seeing isn't hitting that standard. So at one point, about 5 or 6 years ago, might have been a little longer, he decided that Agile had just become a marketing term and that there needed to be another way to talk about Agile, and that wouldn't happen too. So he came up with artisanal retrofuturism crossed with team scale and narco-syndicalism. He said, nobody will ever turn that into a buzzword. There aren't even that many people on the planet who can say it, I gotta tell you. I feel pretty proud of that. Artisanal has to do with craftsmanship, right? Retrofuturism has to do with getting what you want. Where is my jetpack? It's 2010, it's 2015, where's my jetpack? Team scale, thinking in terms of the people who do the work at the level that the work gets done. And anarcho-syndicalism, which as it turns out is a workforce philosophy that arose in the early 1900s that had to do with workers owning the means of production. In other words, the people who worked in a corporation would own the corporation. Well, you know, little anarchic, a little bit about syndicates, the corporate part, right? Put that together. And the reason that, and part of was he was going around talking about this, he described an experience that he was having that was very familiar to me. And he said that in the early days of Agile, and for me, it was in the days before Agile when I was going around doing, helping organizations doing work process design with knowledge workers primarily. You go in and people would have adopted Agile or would have redesigned their work. And when knowledge workers redesign their work, here's a clue. Every single time, every single organization I went in where the knowledge workers redesigned their work, they created cross-functional, self-organizing teams. That's the way you get work done when you've got to share a lot of learning and knowledge and skills among a lot of people to produce a result, right? I didn't ever impose that on any of those teams. They chose it. I said, here are some of the principles of good work design. It should be high, good quality of work life. There should minimize handoffs, blah, blah, blah. And they would come up with cross-functional work teams. So when I was first introduced to Agile, I was like, this is just good work design, right? Actually came in through the XP door, right? And I said, wow, this seems like the right good design for this kind of work. And in those days, Brian and I and a lot of other people were hearing people, after the team had kind of settled in and gotten its rhythm going, saying, oh gosh, I love this work. This is the best job ever. Partly because they had designed it themselves, or, in the case of a lot of those early Agile teams, it was a grassroots movement, so they had adopted it themselves. And then what we noticed over time is that as we ran around and talked to other folks, what we were hearing, and more recently as we go to team members, and they'd say, well, yeah, Agile's good. My job sucks less now. And there's a huge qualitative difference between, I love this work, this is the best job ever, and my job sucks less. So this is so important to me that our company, FutureWorks, has this as our vision. That we contribute to a world where everyone at every level of an organization can say, I love my work, this is the best job ever. Because we know it's possible. We've seen it, just not in a lot of places, right? So that also fed into this. It's like, well, what we're seeing in Agile is not people saying this. And what we know is that if organizations are going to get the kind of performance and productivity they want, people need to love their work. That's the only path there, right? And around this time, we started seeing a lot of people sort of misrepresenting Agile, or at least what we think Agile is, based on the manifesto and stuff. We'd start hearing all these things about you're Agile, you're not. It's not enough to do Agile, you have to be Agile, right? There were just all these kind of pronouncements going on, and it's like, really? Is that the point? I thought this was about collaboration. And no, there's religious wars. It's Scrum, no, it's XP, no, it's this, no, it's that. And we were presenting a workshop together, actually more of a boot camp that Jim and I were doing that we called, kind of playing off the name of his book, The Art of Agile Planning and Delivery. And this was the real trigger. This was the real trigger for the model. You're hearing the Genesis story here, right? We had presented this workshop a couple of times, and the first couple of times we presented it, in the planning part, we started out by saying, you create your vision, your product vision, and you get a roadmap, and then you do your release planning, and then you do your iteration or sprint planning, and then you do your daily stand-ups, and you have user stories and a backlog, and right. And at the end of the course, people would say, wow, that was a really good course. And in that first part, I was waiting a long time to get to the stuff I could really get my hands around. That vision stuff, I don't know. So, in response to customer demand, we redesigned the course. And we started out with, okay, we're going to learn to write user stories, and then we're going to do iterate. We're going to create a little backlog, then we'll do some iteration planning, then we'll do some release planning, we'll talk about road mapping, vision, and the feedback we got was, I never really got how it was all going to hang together. Right. So we're sitting in my dining room one day saying, okay, we tried it top down, we tried it bottom up. Is there a sideways way we can try this? What are we going to do? And as often you do when you're confronted with a really sort of thorny problem, we procrastinated. And we started talking about this kind of cool thing that we had run into. This is a nonprofit organization, Language Hunters, and I'm actually on the board. And what they do is they teach people how to learn languages. Not how to teach languages, but how to learn languages. And they use, as part of the basis of their work, something called the ACTFL scale. And ACTFL stands for American College of Teachers or Council of Teachers of Foreign Languages. And so Jim and I had just been at a game. It's a learning game. And we had just been playing the game, and so we were talking about that, and we were talking about the ACTFL scale, and a light bulb went off. So what if we thought of Agile in terms of fluency the way ACTFL thinks of language in terms of fluency? And how the ACTFL scale came about was that after World War II, the US needed to populate a whole bunch of new consulates and embassies around the world in new languages that the diplomatic corps hadn't had to deal with before. And they had to, completely staff these places, and they needed people to speak those languages. Well, how do you train up thousands of people, right? So the government went to the ACTFL folks and said, can you help us? And they thought about it, and they said, well, everybody doesn't need the same level of fluency. The Marine Guard at the consulate or embassy gate really only needs to be able to say good morning, good evening, halt. Right? They call that novice level fluency. Single words and phrases, memorized. Right? It's like having a little guidebook. How do I say, where's the bathroom? Right? Out of context, not a conversation, just the use of a word. Sometimes it'll include memorized songs or poems or stuff like that. But it's those kind of artifacts of culture. That's called novice level. The next level that they identified was more appropriate for people in the consulates who are going to need to steer people one direction or another, traffic, whatever kind of consular traffic cops they had. So, and they needed to be able to string words together into sentences, ask and answer questions, mostly in the present tense. And they call that intermediate. So that's the journalism questions. Who, what, when, where, right? Where are you going? Who do you need to see? That kind of stuff. Then the next level is called advanced, and that is sentences in paragraphs. Past, present, future. Storytelling. Now, the interesting thing is that in many native languages, there are people who never get beyond advanced. Right? Because the next level is superior, and that's the diplomatic level, right? That's the negotiate treaties, give speeches, participate in a debate, that kind of very, maybe teach a class, very high level language ability, but you only need it if you've got one of those kinds of jobs. And like I said, there are many native speakers in a lot of languages who never get there, don't need it, right? So we said, well, what would that look like in Agile? And we started working on a model. And and we knew nobody would like novice, intermediate, advanced, blah, blah, blah. So we decided not to use that language. But we began to put a model together, and we did not use the kind of rigor that our friend who gave us the metrics talk this morning did, but we went out and tested it. So every place we could show up at a big group of people, we would take our model at whatever stage of development it was in at the time and say, what do you think of this? We think this matches our experience. Does it match your experience? And people would say, well, yeah, but this or that, and we'd make some adjustments until we came up with this. And when we finally got here, people were saying to us, yes, we see this all the time. This is what our experience has been. So we've been out talking about this model, and we think it's time to help other people use the model as well. And actually, people are contacting us, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. It's saying, we've used the model. We sent it out for review. Linda was one of our reviewers. And as a part of that review, we asked people to, give us edits and that sort of thing, but also we asked people for ideas of where should we publish this model. And one of the people that we sent it to was Martin Fowler, and he said, oh, this really resonates for me. Could I publish it on my blog? And so that's where it lives. So you can get to it by the link agilefluency.com if you want to read the whole article, but also if you're familiar with Martin's Blicky, you can find it there through that way. So what is this? How does this work? What are the levels of Agile fluency that we're talking about? And just like, and I want to emphasize this right from the beginning, just like the levels of language fluency, your team only needs the level of fluency they need to do the job they need to do. So we have used a way of talking about it in terms of stars, 1, 2, 3, 4 stars. Do not be fooled by the star numbers. 4 stars may not be the right thing for you, and in fact, probably isn't for the vast majority of teams. There's no need for teams to get there. And they can't, actually, unless there's a lot of other supporting things going on. So the idea is to figure out, are you the guard at the gate who needs to say halt and good morning and good evening and that's exactly what you need, or do you need something different? So as I go through this, I invite you to think about your teams and what level of fluent proficiency do they need? And fluency we define as routine ease, right? This isn't the thing you do sometimes when you're really stretching and doing well. This is what you do all the time. If it was language, it would be, if I woke you up in the middle of the night and spoke German in your face, could you respond to me in German, right? So even when when the pressure is on, when the VP is breathing down your neck, this is still the way you do your work because you're fluent at this level, okay? So we think of the 1 star as being basically Agile fundamentals, the things that most teams need. 2 star is Agile sustainability. The fundamentals will get you a product out the door. But if you need to continually do that on an ongoing basis, then you might need sustainability. 3 star is what often gets sold as Agile. It's the promise that people get. And 4, we think may be Agile's future. We don't know that we don't find a lot of folks who are doing this. As a matter of fact, when people have understood the whole model and we have polled the audience about where do you think your teams, what level of fluency are you exhibiting, we get about 45, a little less than half of folks usually say 1 star. About a third will say 2. Maybe 15% will say 3. And then we'll get, 2 hands that go up and say, well, we think we're 4. All right. So we have seen 4, but not very often. All right. So the whole thing starts with your ability to build code. If you don't have a team of people, if you don't have a group of people, individual contributors who can actually produce decent code, you've got other problems. Don't think about Agile yet, right? Make sure you get hire for adequate, right? Make sure you've got people who can do the work they need to do, right? They may be doing it as individual contributors. Maybe there's a group of people who are kind of sitting over in a corner and somebody calls them a team, but they don't act like a team in any other way, but they can crank out code. They know what good code looks like. So that's where it starts. You have to have that. That's the ground. That's the pre-Agile, right? That's 0 stars, right? But you got to have that, right? And then if you have that, then you can begin to think about, should we move on and adopt Agile? And the first thing you need to think about is, how am I going to help these people? If you're a coach or a manager, how many in here would call yourselves a coach, a manager, a team lead, mentor? Yeah, okay. So if you're in those roles, what you focus on first is helping the team become a team. Develop teaminess, right? How do we think about that? We move from an individual contributor culture to a team culture, right? And very often this is not even yet a cross-functional team. It may be just mostly a team of developers. If you've got a cross-functional team, good on you, but you may not. The idea is to begin to think of a group of yourselves as a group of collaborators who focus on value, who build based on value, not on elegance, not on coolness of the code, not on what's going to impress my peers and colleagues because I was able to do this, but laser focus on customer value. Right? And the way we know that is that those teams think about things from the business perspective. They learn to do that as a team, and they do it in a way that is transparent, such that if somebody realizes we're headed down the wrong path, they can be redirected. Right? We don't want you to go work on that part anymore. We really think we need this feature more. And Agile allows that, right? It's one of the big benefits. So these 1-star teams actually convey a lot of benefit to their organizations, right? I have worked with a IT group in a large utility, electric utility, and they did combined development and maintenance, and they spun up 17 teams. They did 11 and then 5 more and then a couple more. And, if they can all do this, it's huge for them. It is huge. And it's what they need, right? So just to think, in thinking about your own teams, is your team ready to plan and work according to value regularly, routinely, even when they're under pressure, they still pull the next most valuable story. They're still asking their product owner, where's the value here? What's the vision? How does this fit? And can anyone in your organization see progress? Can they walk into your team room? Can they pull up your electronic task board, whatever, see the burn-ups? Can they see what progress you're making, and so they can make choices about what direction they want you to go? How many in here would say your teams are solidly there? Okay, right. So, would it represent a valuable step forward for your team to be able to do this? Yeah, okay. So, maybe this is where you want to begin. Maybe this is where you want to think about being. Right? This is the benefit. And we have, because it's a team culture shift, we have a set of, these metrics are more sort of go to the gemba, things you can walk around and see, right? Those kind of unobtrusive measures, right? So, does the team, like at every demo or during the retrospective, talk about what happened? Can they say what they're working on and how it's progressing toward the overall? Right? This is the metric. If you can say yes to this, pretty much all the time, then it's a one-star team. That may or may not be enough for you. And if it's not enough, you need also then to think about skills. And make sure that your team cannot just build code, but build code in such a way that they can deliver on the customer cadence. And this means things like continuous integration, possibly continuous deployment, at minimum probably some kind of frequent releases, understanding what your customer's cadence is, how often do they want to receive code. I've worked with organizations that were, actually Jim and I both worked in an organization that was building software for mass spectrometers. The customer cadence in that instance was about 18 months. Because any more often than that, and they had to go through a very expensive FDA certification process and blah, 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 and so that was about it. I've also worked with websites that are deploying multiple times a day. My most recent client had a team that were one team that was expected to deploy multiple times a day, one team that was expected to deploy multiple times a week, another team that needed to deploy once a week, and a third one that needed to deploy a couple times a month, because they all had different customers. And they understood those needs. So this kind of skills that you need to do that are TDD, are continuous integration, or refactoring, those kinds of things that help you build very low or no defect code. Because when you're delivering that often, you can't afford to be going back and fixing things. And of course, your customer doesn't care if they're getting it 3 times a day if it's crap. Right? So it's kind of, you have to have that high quality built in as well. So in this instance, this is a team that we call 2-star, or deliver on value. And they can ship on the market cadence. They know what that market cadence is, and they can ship on it. They are capturing value, bringing that back into the organization frequently, and able to reveal obstructions early on. Does your team know the right delivery cadence for your customer? Do team members have the skills to deliver no defects? They need to? Chasing people out by asking that question. Right. This is achievable. This is achievable. I've seen it. Seen it in the wild. And would this represent the significant sweet spot for you? If it would, then 2-star is where you need to focus, right? You'll do all the things you need to do for 1-star and the things that you need to do for 2-star, right? And your team, more than likely, you'll see 1-star behavior before you'll see 2-star behavior, but it's better to just focus where you want to go right from the beginning. Right. So the core metric for this one, shipping. Ship it. As somebody just wrote a book that says, ship it, right? You talk to Jez Humble, right? So those first 2 levels really do focus a lot on the team. And the real focus there is the team. And if those are the appropriate levels, that's the fluency you need, you can probably get away with just working with the team, right? Just coaching at that level. If, however, you want to go to this next level, the 3-star level, then you need to look at organizational structure. How is your management layer structured? How is your product management layer structured? What lines of information and chains of information flow in and out of the team? How does that happen? How much do managers talk to each other about supporting the work that the teams need to do? All of those things begin to come into play at this level. And the team is able to step up even further and provide even more benefit, which includes making excellent product decisions that happen in the team. Don't have to wait for somebody else to make the decision. It happens in the team. Right? Who was it? It was last night at Agile Philly, the guy was talking about his team in Kiev and how they work it out so that, or was that you that was talking about being able to have a team lead, but also other people who could make fast decisions, right? And that was you, yeah. Eliminating handoffs, making sure that decisions are happening as fast as they can. So the team has to know how to make decisions and then have the right information to base those decisions on. There's a whole skill around decision making in groups, right? Right. So the things that you look here is that, does every team have fluid, immediate access to business information? Who here has that in every team? Yay, Katie. Yeah, it's easier in a startup. That's right. The bigger the organization gets, the more challenging a lot of these things are, which is why, in many instances, the bigger the organization is, 1 or 2 star is probably the right place for you. Because you need more nimbleness. You need more innovative thinking to work at this level. Does your organization need the kind of innovative action that this would provide? So that's the organization structure shift, and the metric here is that the team understands the business they're in well enough to report out their work using business metrics, business language. Eric Evans talks about ubiquitous language in teams, right? In domain-driven design. So if you want to keep going, you want to go even further, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one because of the response we've gotten so far. Don't know how much interest there is, but the next is really the culture shift. It's not enough to just restructure things. You actually have to think differently about being in business. And we do tend to see, when we do see these 4-star teams, they tend to be startups or just startups just maturing into maybe another level, where the founders have said, we are going to do what we can to maintain the kind of culture that we've had, right? Which doesn't mean keeping it the same. Scott Birkin just wrote a great blog post on that. This star, the 4-star, we call optimized for systems because this requires systems thinking from everybody in the room. Right? The team needs to be able to think in terms of the whole organization. So in this instance, what we see is not just teams making smart product decisions for themselves, but smart product decisions for the whole organization. As an example, I was working with one team, and they were saying, you know, we're just not going to be able to get to the next piece that we're going to work on without some input from our one database guy. We don't have, nobody's generalized enough into the database that we've got this one guy who's kind of a bottleneck around here. And I said, well, why don't you go schedule him to come in and the team? And they said, no. There's another team working on another product that's much more important to our company, and they need him first. So they could sacrifice what was happening with their own product for something that was better for the whole company. And that's the kind of thing that you see. It stimulates innovation. So what's this team going to do? Sit around twiddling its thumbs? No, they're going to figure out something else to do. Somebody's going to go out and learn about databases, or they're going to think in new ways to solve their problems. So in this instance, teams really are full partners. They are a part of the organization. I listened yesterday to Chris Merrick talking about RJ metrics. And I really want to go visit them. Because a lot of what he was talking about sounded very 4-star-ish to me. Now, I haven't been there, I haven't talked about them any further. It was, it was an hour presentation, so how much can you learn? But many of the things he was talking about reminded me of teams at this level. And it was interesting because he talked a lot about hiring generalists to be able to do this, not specialists. I thought that was interesting. So can your teams make choices that support whole organization success, not just local success? So, globalized thinking instead of local thinking? And would your organization benefit if they could, leverage everybody's good thinking, everybody's knowledge, everybody's ability to learn on behalf of what they need? And here you can talk to pretty much any team member, and they will tell you how they fit into the organization, what their team does for the greater good, that sort of thing. They tend to be very vision and mission focused, these folks. So the interesting thing is, it seems like, rather than having religious wars about Agile methodologies, they all have a place. They all have a piece of the puzzle. So a really good place to start for a lot of teams, and it depends a bit on the work, but either the Scrum time box, Scrum rituals and artifacts, it's a great way to bring a team together, or a Kanban, where everybody's really focused on, we have our work in process limits, and they're ours, they're not mine, right? It's that shift to team thinking and collaborative thinking that both Scrum and Kanban really foster, right? So there's great practices and tools there. To get to the 2-star level, at some point you've got to bring in the engineering stuff. You've got to be thinking in terms of software craftsmanship. You've got to be thinking in terms of the XP practices. If you're in that sort of environment, you need to be thinking about DevOps. How is that interface happening, and how are you blending there? Feature-driven development, making sure that your teams are all feature teams, not component teams. 3-star, thinking in terms of lean startup, lean software development, like the Popendicks talk about, other things like that, is really more about that organizational thinking and engaging management in thinking in that way. And then finally, really having that real systems thinking, complex adaptive systems grounding, and being able to deal with a world where things are constantly changing. Right. So there's a lot out there. There's a lot out there, and we keep hearing about new things all the time. And, you know, every time somebody has asked me, well, don't you think Agile is dead? I've pretty much said, you know what? I think Agile is in its infancy. At best, it's in its adolescence. It is still evolving. We don't know where it's going to go. It is part of a greater movement that's been going on for a while about people having higher quality work lives and having the tools they need to do work they're proud of. And there's a lot of that out there. And Agile is one part of that stream. And there's still new things to learn. So, as coaches and team leads and managers, how can you contribute? How can you make sure that this can happen in your organization? How many of you, after just hearing this brief description, and I know that's not much, so you might want to dig more deeply to read the article or whatever, but just from what I've said, how many of you think that the sweet spot for your organization would be one-star teams? If you could count on them being one-star teams all the time. How many? 2? 3? Okay. 4? Any 4s in the room? Yeah. So thinking in those terms, what is it that do we need? And the thing is, it's not just about benefits, it's about investments and trade-offs too. You don't get those benefits just by saying we want the benefits, which is another way that I think Agile has been missold. People talk a lot about the benefits of Agile without really talking about the very real investment, trade-offs, effort that's going to need to be put in to gain those benefits. And to gain the 1-star, you really need to look at, are we willing to create a team configuration here? Are we willing to support it? Are we willing to give, if they're co-located, are we willing to give them a workspace that's going to work for them? If they're not co-located, are we willing to give them all the electronic mediation tools and everything they need to communicate with each other in a way that's going to help them get the work done? Right? That's an investment. Right? Can we give them clear business priorities? Team cannot focus on value if somebody isn't clear about where the value is coming from. Right? So somebody's going to have, and that's not trivial. That's not trivial. I see so many teams that get tripped up by that. It's not anything the team's doing, it's that nobody else can figure out what's valuable, or they're all fighting with each other about what's valuable, and they can't deliver a clear message to the team. So there's a real investment that's needed there. Making sure that you can have that clarity, and then making sure you've got a work process that works for you, whether that's Scrum or Kanban or Scrumban or some, whatever it might be. There's actually a book, Scrumban, isn't there, Jim? Yeah. Whatever is the right work process, team work process for you, figuring out what that is and installing it and supporting it. That's not trivial. And if you want 2-star, you need to do all those things and make sure you've got training in place for folks to upskill. They get technical mentoring on the job. They're doing pairing. They're setting up all other kinds of anything that will help them be more productive. The source of more productivity is not in team members. The source of more productivity is in the systems that surround the team members, right? So are we getting those in place? For 3-star, are we making sure that every team has access to business expertise? It may not be that every team has an embedded product owner, but maybe they've at least got a business analyst or some very wise QA person who understands their domain. Somebody is there that can help, that can answer team questions, understands what's going on with the customer. Maybe it's the UX, UI folks. I've seen a couple of teams where they provide that. There will probably need to be some shift in management thinking at minimum, and maybe in management structure. So somebody has to spend the social capital to make this happen. So if you're a coach or a team lead or somebody who wants to help this in your organization, look around for the champion who is going to be willing to go to bat for you when things get tough. And then finally, shifting to that whole system focus, not thinking about what's going on in my team, but thinking about what's going on in the whole organization, learning about how to engage complexity, how to work in that kind of world, and really understanding what it takes to build a great culture and sustain it. Because sustaining a great culture means it's going to change, but you want to keep influencing it to change in the right direction. So, what benefit does your organization want or need? What investments are you willing to get there? And this is worth spending some time thinking about, and maybe, getting a few folks together in your organization and saying, what is it we really are looking for out of this Agile thing we're doing? What do we really need to happen, and how do we get there? And can we afford it? Some of it's trade-offs, but some of it's investment in real money, right? So the feedback that we've been getting on this model has been really helpful and very great. And one of the things that make me feel proudest of it is that people understand that every level of fluency has value. It's a very positive model. There's nothing in here that's tearing any other part of Agile down, right? It says, we are in a big tent. Let's all figure out how we can work together and help each other. And no matter where your team is, if they are fluently there and it's the right spot for them, that has tremendous value. It's inclusive. Any or all methods can get you there. Right? We recommend maybe start with Scrum or Kanban, but you could probably, Arlo tells us, I got there and I started with XP. So, and you got to believe Arlo, so. Right? And it promotes improvement. Every new star level, every star that gets added at that level opens up, illuminates new kinds of benefits that may or may not be important to you. But you can see that there is that possibility there. I honestly, at first people kept saying to me, isn't this haven't you come up with an Agile maturity model? And I was like, God forbid, no. No, it's like you're going to the park, and if you want to park your car, the parking lot's the right place to be. But if you want to play baseball, you better go find the sports field, right? It's not that one place is better than the other, it's that one level is more fit for purpose than another. And that's not about maturity, that's just about conditions and constraints and what's going on in the organization and what its history has been and all that kind of stuff. So this is the model. You may have noticed on the first slide that we have now trademarked it. It didn't start out that way. And the reason we've trademarked it is that our attorneys have told us, unless you want people running off with calling any number of things Agile Fluency, you need to maintain some control over that. So that's what we're doing. But our intention is to build a community around it. And if you'll notice, the copyright we have on here says anybody can use it. Just keep the copyright there, right? We want any people to be able to freely use it. So if it looks like something that would be useful to you and you want to use it and you're worried about the trademark, get in touch with us. That's the inclusive thing includes that, right? We just have to, unfortunately, why can't we have nice things? Like Joel said on yesterday morning, right? Well, because we can't always have nice things, we've had to trademark the model. So, but it feels, I don't know, the more I work with it, the more it kind of opens itself up to me, the more I learn through it. And I really encourage you to look at it, think about it, just use it as a thought experiment in your own organizations. How could it help? Because that's what we want to find out. I had a couple people suggest to me that you could use it in a retrospective. Where do we think we are so far in our team? Are we 3/4 of the way to 2-star fluency, and what would get us? And it's another way to have that conversation. So there are a number of articles and resources out there. There's the original article, is this the first thing. There's a number of InfoQ articles and videos and things that are out there. One, Martin Fowler is talking about it, so he's talking about it from his perspective, which is really interesting. The one in yellow, project.agilefluency.com, is the next place that we want to take, that Jim and I want to take it. And that is toward building this community. And the first thing that we're going to do is provide some experiences and some materials. And if you want to be among the first folks to hear about them, go to that and leave your name, and we'll make sure that you hear about them first. We're not using the names that we collect for any other purposes, but just spreading the word about Agile Fluency. So that's what you'll find there. And that's me. And do we have any time for questions? Yes, we have time. 5 minutes. Any questions? Yeah. Yeah. Yes. But none of them consistently. Yeah, and that's can you count on it or not, right, is the measure. And so one of the things that you could sort of got a glimpse of it there, one of the things that we've begun to create and work on is this set of metrics, and they are all like, you can walk around and look for these things, and if you see them, you've got them. If you don't see them, you know that's missing. So they're not hard to use or really, sophisticated in that sense, but they're useful in that they give you a little breadcrumb path that you can follow. So we're putting that together because we're going to publish some more things about it. So that's one thing. Just the questions that are in here, and I did add a couple of things to these slides because I can't ever leave them alone. After I sent them in, 3 or 4 weeks ago for inclusion in whatever they publish after this event. So if you don't see everything, when those come out, I'm sure Chariot is going to let everybody know when all the slide decks are available. When those come out, if you see something that's missing, get in touch with me, and we can talk about it. Yeah, and all my contact information is up there. Yeah. Other questions?
Yeah. Could you talk a little about software quality? We have a co-located team in a large organization. The development team definitely knows how to develop code. Where our team seems to struggle sprint by sprint is making sure that the requirements have been documented. We have test case documentation. And, we struggle to kind of get through to the final approval to say, yes, this is nearly perfect.
Right.
Within our sprint time. But how is that represented in that framework?
Well, so, yeah, I didn't talk about that. I would say that I said that at the 1-star level, you may have a team that's only programmers, By the 2-star level, you should have a cross-functional team. And that would embed testers or QA folks in the team, and so that activity is going on all through the sprint. So, people talk about your definition of done, is one quality gate, right? Another quality gate is what's the feedback you're getting from your demos. How are you pairing or doing some kind of peer reviews on a regular basis and making sure you have time for that. I actually even think it starts before that at story time and stuff. Our developers working with the product owners to write stories so that the product owner can write stories in such a way that they can be developed in a good way, right? A good solid way. And then again, it has to do with what's your customer's definition of quality? What are they going to say satisfies or exceeds their needs, right? And depending on what market you're in or what kind of software you're building or whatever, that varies wildly. But it's really knowing what that is and where that is, and then putting all those pieces in place. I really worry when I hear about team, and I have no doubt there are some in this room that are doing build sprints and then test sprints. It's like there's something that basket has a hole in it, right? I think of all the practices and all these things as kind of as all weave together to create a basket. And if there's some practice you're not doing, like cross-functional team that includes testers, that's a hole in the basket, and that's going to be leaky. And what's going to leak out is your level of quality, right? So, without knowing specifics, I can't really, yeah.
What do you do in the scenario in which subject matter expertise has vanished? So you assemble a team, folks don't really have the knowledge or the know-how, which makes it a bit harder to make sound decisions or even gauge what the customer's looking for. So how do you respond to that? Like, obviously you learn, but...
Yeah. See, the thing is, I have the luxury of, I always come in as an outsider, right? And so I don't have to be worried about being fired, right? So if I see a team, if I'm working with a team and they're not getting access to understanding about customers, we do a field trip. I just take the team and we go to some place that, it's either the customer or some place that represents the customers. We get as close as we can. I always think about in distributed teams, and this is a little tangent, and my bell rang, so I know we're past time. But on distributed teams, I get asked all the time, how should we communicate and what do we know is the right level of collaboration? It's like, we know. Alistair Coburn told us. He did the research. 2 people face-to-face in front of a whiteboard is the richest richest channel of communication there is. So whatever other circumstances we have, we get as close to that as we can. So if we're distributed, we're not going to be 2 people face-to-face in front of a whiteboard, but how can we get close to that? What's the closest we can get? And so it's the same question. If you can't have a customer sitting with your team or nearby your team, how do you get as close to that customer as you can? And if it's not through your product owner or not through a business analyst or somebody else, or they can't give you good information, then how else can you do it? And that's what I look for when I go in and I see a team that's that disconnected. The other thing is that it's amazingly motivating when you know who is the recipient of what you're building. Years and years and years ago, I did some work at Tektronix, and I worked with people who were making probes that went into oscilloscopes, right? That's a whole other story. But when they got to go on a field trip to the hospital, and they heard patients talk about how the measurements that came out of that oscilloscope saved their life, they went back to the factory floor re-energized. And that happens to anybody. And that's human. That's that human connection. So I'd look for a way to foster that. So thank you, everybody.